This morning, I'd like you to open your Bibles with me back to Matthew chapter 6, starting at verse 19. And we're going to continue in the series Rock Solid Living as we work through Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 6, as I mentioned last week, discusses two major issues that we as human beings encounter in life. They are issues that we do encounter them, we need to recognize them, and then we need to move to resolution in them if we're going to fully enter into the life of the kingdom of God. That's why Jesus is talking about it to us. The first one we dealt with the last 2 weeks, and that's living for the approval of others. Okay, now, you may think that you don't do that. I may think that I don't do that. But there's a very subtle thing that creeps into our lives at times where we begin to live for the praises that other people give to us. And we judge who we are and our effectiveness, and we judge who we are as a person because of what somebody else says about us. And Jesus tells us very clearly this, that if we do the things that we do to serve God in order to please other people and to gain their recognition, we have our reward. When they say, you did this or you did that, you're such a this or you're such a that, you have your reward. And Jesus encourages us that we live our lives to please God alone. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. The second point that he brings up is going to be our focus for this morning, and that's living for the acquisition of material wealth. Living to gain. One commentator suggests that these two issues that I've just mentioned to you are the places where we find security. They're the places where you and I find where we can settle and feel safe. When you and I know we have the approval of others, it gives us a certain sense of settledness. When we feel like, as a matter of fact, I had a friend tell me one time, when your money in the bank is what you think it ought to be, it just gives you a little more peace. Can you relate to that idea? I mean, we all, when you come to the end of the month, and as the saying goes, there's more month than there is money, all of us feel a little bit insecure, don't we? There's an uncertainty. And now, I know you're people of faith, and you say, I'm going to believe God and trust God is going to provide for me. I know that. But the reality of it is, when we have what we think is enough, it engenders in us a certain level of security. This morning, I want to begin by asking you a question, because it's where Jesus begins. And the question is simply this: what do you treasure? What do you treasure? What's important to you? Nothing wrong with having treasures. As a matter of fact, Paul says in the New Testament that God has given us all things richly to enjoy. And I take it that means sour cream raisin pie. That's on the list. It is not inappropriate for us to enjoy those things, okay? But what is it that we treasure, that we find of great value to us? As a matter of fact, that question can be broken down a number of different ways, but it all comes back to what is it that you and I value. And that's the point of Jesus' teaching today, is to awaken us to the reality that sometimes the things that we treasure and our willingness to do, as we've just sung this morning, Lord, I give you my heart, I give you my soul, I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment that I'm awake, Lord, have your way in me. Sometimes, see if you can identify with this, sometimes the things I treasure get in the way of the words of that song. Are you with me this morning? Sometimes the desire, the things that we treasure, and our desire to live wholeheartedly for God find themselves in conflict with one another. Let's begin at verse 19 and listen to what Jesus says. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. We're going to take this in two parts because today we celebrate communion, and so we will not cover all of that passage today. We'll only cover verses 19 through, I think, verse 21. Regardless of the nature of the things that we treasure, they are intended to be a hedge for us against the changing conditions of life. The things that you and I treasure, we have them because they do provide a measure of security for us. They do provide a buffer for us. I want to take just a second to look at this word treasure. The Greek word that's used here is one that you and I will be familiar with because we have incorporated it into our English language. Is anybody familiar with a thesaurus? That is the Greek word for treasure that is used here. Thesaurus. Now, think about it for a second. How does that apply? Choices of words. Exactly. A thesaurus is a very useful tool for a writer because one of the things that a writer does not want to do is to go back and reuse the same words all the time. So you want to have variety in what you're saying. So from the treasure of many words, the writer is then able to draw a number of selections that will enable him or her to convey an idea. Do you get the idea of treasure that's bound up in this word treasure or thesaurus that's being used here? It's a resource, isn't it? It's a place of supply for us. We have another usage of this word in our language that may make the meaning even more clear. How about treasury? If we were to use the word treasury, what do you think of? A bank. Yeah, we think of a bank. And what do we go to the bank for? For money. Stuff, right? We even have safe deposit boxes in banks to keep other stuff. And so it becomes a treasury. It becomes a place where we deposit things so that we can come back later on and use them for what? Why do we have savings in the bank? For emergencies. For stuff. Okay? That's exactly, yeah, what's a saving? We'll talk later. Savings so that when the normal budgeted income that you have is inadequate, you draw from it, right? And so now do you see the idea of it becoming a security for us? It becomes a hedge for us against unexpected expenses, against unexpected problems. You blow a tire, and you need to go out and buy a tire, and you have money in your treasury in order for you to be able to make the necessary repairs and then move on. It's interesting, in Malachi 3:10, you'll recognize this, but it goes back to this idea of treasury because it's the same kind of concept. See if you can finish this. Bring all the tithe into the storehouse, okay? The storehouse is a treasury. So now when we ask the question, what do you treasure? It takes on a little different meaning, because now we're not just looking at the fact that I might value one make of car over another make of car, or that I might value one restaurant over another restaurant. But it begins to encompass this idea of where do we find our security and our strength and our confidence. And so when Jesus says, don't lay up treasures, he's talking about the very idea of setting things aside, isn't he? Don't lay up earthly treasures, lay up heavenly treasures, so that they become our source of confidence. It would be appropriate for us to understand then that Jesus' point to include all the individual treasures that we have, and to also include the place where we keep them, is included in this thought. He's talking about the trust that we place in those things. I've often thought that when Jesus references here, don't lay up treasures, that it was just something that we value, but he's talking about all the things that we've set aside and the things that we put our trust in. The things that we count on to bail us out in a time of need. And that comes into play here. Jesus' point now, and we need to be very, very quick to say this, Jesus' point, and I'm sure you have heard this preached in some way in reference to this passage. Jesus' point is not that we should avoid treasures. Jesus' point is not to say to us that it's wrong for us to have treasures. That's not what he's saying to us at all. It's not that he's trying to tell us that we should divest ourselves of all of those things, because we all need financial resources in order to take care of the business of life. And we all need a certain amount of reserves for those unexpected times. Jesus is not addressing that. As a matter of fact, we could even take a treasure, something that we trust in. Insurance of all types is an absolute necessity in today's economy. Matter of fact, you can't even get a driver's license or buy a car if you don't have insurance on your car. You have to have it. It is a source, if you will, of security. It is a treasure for us. It's interesting that a couple of generations ago, within the Christian church, that it was considered to be a lack of faith if you had insurance. You were not trusting God if you had insurance, because God is everything you need. Well, now I don't disagree with that God is all that I need, but I don't think that that's Jesus' point here. I think we'll see that as we go on. When our treasures become our safety, it becomes the thing for which you and I live. And I want you to think here with me for a second. I know Jesus talks about money, and he specifically references that. But I think there's also a little bit broader discussion that we have to have, because there are other things that you and I put trust in. You might put your trust in a degree that you have. You might put your trust in a job that you have. and find your sense of security there. There are any number of places that we can turn that would fit Jesus' description here of saying, be careful that you don't lay up treasures just here on earth, but that our main place of laying up treasures is in heaven. I was thinking about this as I was preparing for this morning, and thinking about Abraham and how he dealt with God saying to him, I want you to take your son Isaac and make him a sacrifice. Now, Isaac obviously is not money, but he was certainly a place of security for Abraham. And do you think he was a treasure? Absolutely, he was a treasure. When you wait 25 years for a son to be born, who is the fulfillment of the promise of God and the expression of the identity that God has given you, I guarantee you it's a treasure. Abraham could have made the argument, but it's Isaac that's going to save me when I get to be an older man. It's Isaac that's going to take care of me when I can't take care of myself and perhaps Sarah is already gone. Isaac is the one who's going to be that treasure in my life. How tragic to have Isaac's miraculous birth steal Abraham's heart from God. Hypothesize with me for a moment. Think if Abraham had not taken Isaac to the mountain. Think if Abraham had not been willing to put Isaac on the altar. How would that have affected Abraham's life? How would it have changed his relationship with God? Especially when we see the fact that God responds to Abraham and says, Now, Abraham, I know that you don't love anybody more than me. Now that I know you took the most treasured thing in your life and you gave it to me. Now, Abraham, I know I can trust you with everything else that I have planned for you because you've given me your very, very best. And folks, that's what Jesus is getting at to us. This isn't just about money. It isn't just about all of those business things that we do. What Jesus is talking to us about this morning is, where do you and I find the security that we're looking for that so often is bound up in the things that we treasure? I've never had this problem, but I know of folks who have a lot of money who have bought diamonds because diamonds are very convertible to cash. And rather than having money in a savings account, they buy diamonds or they buy gold because they become a greater collateral in times of economic disturbance or upheaval. So what are the things that we trust? And that's what God is asking us, because we serve what we treasure the most. We serve what we treasure the most. Having stuff takes time. Having stuff takes time. If you have a house, your house requires things of you, does it not? Inside and out. There are things that we have to do in order to take care of our house. And here's the challenge for us, folks. Having stuff not only takes time, it takes affection. It takes affection. It gets into our heart. When I bought my first car, bought it from Mom and Dad, and it was really cool. And I had a lot of jealous friends. And Mom and Dad accused me of washing it so often that I was going to wash the paint off the car. It steals our affection. And so when Jesus says to us, lay up treasures, not on earth, but in heaven, what he's also trying to speak to us about is that we don't allow something to steal our affection for him. Our different responses, we all have different responses to our treasures and to the things that we value, that we think are important. Our different responses can often be explained by the simple differences in approach, because there are different ways to go about accomplishing the same end. But Jesus' point here is that when our affection for God and his kingdom and his purposes suffer, when they suffer because we are taking care of material wealth, then we have crossed into a region that's harmful to us. And he's saying, don't let that happen. Remember, we're talking about how do we live in the kingdom. Now, interestingly enough, Jesus begins the second half of this passage that we are going to talk about next Sunday by saying this. So don't worry. Those are the opening words. Okay? So don't worry. And see, isn't that when we talk about treasures and the things that we value, we worry because if we don't have them, we will somehow be vulnerable. And what he's saying to us is, I don't want you to worry, but I do want you to address this. And I do want you to look at what's going on in your life as it relates to the things that you treasure. Because there are times, folks, when you and I can't see that the thing that we treasure has us by the throat. It has us by the throat. And even though, and please don't misunderstand me, I am not suggesting for one moment this morning that any of you have fallen away from God or that you're devaluing God in any kind of sense. What I'm saying is that there are times when the things that we think are very important to us will do that very thing to us. And you and I can't always see it. You and I are sometimes too close, as they say, to the forest to see the trees. And it takes somebody to come alongside us in graciousness and in patience to say, have you taken a look at this? There are a wide variety of things, folks, that can affect us in this fashion, that our treasure valuation for them is higher than what's spiritually healthy for us to experience. It's interesting that Jesus uses the word master to describe what treasures do to us. He finishes the text, verse 24. We'll get to that next week. No, we're doing that. Yeah, we'll get it then. But isn't it interesting that he uses the word master? Don't let your treasures master you. Don't let your treasures master you. And you say, but I don't have a lot. Let me give you another disclaimer. It is not a prerequisite that you have lots of treasure for them to master you. It is not a prerequisite. We can be mastered by anything that we place at a high enough level of valuation that we let it interrupt our spiritual maturity. So, I want to conclude this morning by asking you the opening question again. What do you treasure? And I changed the picture this time. Because see, the first time it was a treasure chest. This time you can't tell it from where you're sitting, but the book is a Bible. And there's a wedding ring on it. So what are the things that we treasure? Because Jesus says that where your heart is, that your treasures will dictate where your heart is. Your treasures will dictate that.